That painkiller in your medicine cabinet isn't what you think it is. The bottle you trust without reading the label. The one your mother kept in the kitchen drawer. The one your doctor never warned you about. The one millions of Americans reach for every single day, sometimes 3, 4, 5 times a week, without ever thinking twice. Behind those familiar names is a story most consumers were never told. Recalls that quietly pulled millions of bottles off American shelves. FDA warnings strengthened, not once but twice in the last decade. Hidden ingredients researchers have linked to long-term cognitive decline in older adults. Manufacturing scandals where over-the-counter pills were produced in the same building as prescription opioids. And price markups so absurd that the exact same molecule sits on the same shelf for a fraction of the cost. I spent weeks digging through FDA records, recall histories, USPSTF guideline updates, independent lab reports, and the fine print pharmaceutical companies hope nobody ever reads. What I found is going to make you look at your medicine cabinet differently for the rest of your life. In this video, I'm walking you through 7 of the most trusted painkiller brands in America that a growing number of doctors and pharmacists are quietly telling people to reconsider, and 3 options sitting right next to them on the same shelf that are actually worth keeping around. If you've got Tylenol, Advil, Aleve, Excedrin, or Bayer in your house right now, you need to watch this all the way through to the end. One thing matters before any names get mentioned. This isn't a doctor telling you to stop your medication. This is consumer reporting. The kind of information that drug companies spend hundreds of millions of dollars keeping buried in fine print and side effect inserts that nobody reads. The conclusions you draw and any changes you actually make, those should happen between you and a real human in a white coat who knows your full history. But what you're about to hear should not be a secret. The fact that it largely still is should tell you something. 7. Excedrin migraine. Let's start with a name that's been a Sunday morning staple for 2 generations. Excedrin migraine. For decades, this little green box has been the migraine medicine. The real one. The one people swear by when nothing else works. What most consumers don't realize is that Excedrin migraine isn't really a migraine drug at all. It's a stacked cocktail. 3 ingredients pushed into a single tablet: acetaminophen, aspirin, and a generous dose of caffeine. The caffeine isn't there for energy. It's there because caffeine constricts blood vessels and squeezes a little more punch out of the other 2. Clever pharmacology, aggressive marketing. And here's the catch most people never hear. That same combination, used too often, has been repeatedly linked by neurologists to something called medication overuse headache. In plain English, the very pill people take to escape the pain may be quietly training their nervous system to need it. People take Excedrin 3 days a week, then 4, then 5. Then they wake up with a headache that won't leave because their body is now expecting that drug. That's the long-term piece. The short-term piece is even more uncomfortable. In early 2012, the company that owned Excedrin at the time was forced to recall more than 1,600 lots of Excedrin, Bufferin, No-Dose, and Gas-X from American shelves. The reason was straight out of a pharmaceutical nightmare. Bottles may have contained stray tablets from completely different products. Pills may have been broken or chipped. And the most uncomfortable detail of all, the Nebraska plant making Excedrin was also producing prescription opioids in the same facility. Percocet, Endocet, Opana. The FDA publicly acknowledged a real if small concern that opiate pills could have ended up packaged inside over-the-counter bottles. Think about that for a second. The pill Grandma was popping for her headache, manufactured in the same building as Percocet, on equipment shared with a gas relief medication. The FDA's own inspection report alleged that since 2009, the company had failed to adequately investigate 166 separate complaints about pill mix-ups. The quality unit at the factory, the FDA said, had been understaffed and had consistently failed to review critical complaints. The plant was shut down. Excedrin literally vanished from American shelves for months. People who depended on it scrambled for alternatives. And while the company eventually got back into production, the underlying lesson should not have evaporated with the news cycle. That little green box has always been more complicated than the label suggested. 6. Tylenol PM. If Excedrin is the fix-it pill, Tylenol PM is the let me finally sleep pill. You've seen the commercial. Soft lighting, a tired woman in a robe, the promise of waking up rested. For millions of older Americans, this little white and blue bottle has been the difference between another miserable night and a few hours of peace. Here's what the commercial doesn't say. The PM isn't melatonin. It isn't valerian. It isn't some gentle herbal whisper. The PM in Tylenol PM is diphenhydramine, the exact same chemical that's in Benadryl. That word diphenhydramine sounds clinical, almost reassuring. But step back and look at what it actually does inside an aging brain. Diphenhydramine belongs to a class of drugs called anticholinergics. It alters the action of acetylcholine, a brain chemical that is essential for cognitive function and memory. Now, for a 22-year-old taking it once after a bee sting, that's nothing. For a 68-year-old taking it 3 or 4 nights a week to sleep, that's a different story entirely. In 2015, researchers published a landmark study that quietly changed how a lot of geriatricians think about over-the-counter sleep aids. The study found that long-term cumulative use of anticholinergic drugs like diphenhydramine was associated with a higher risk of dementia in older adults. The findings have been echoed in studies published since. The risks appear to climb with prolonged use, particularly in adults over 65. Now, does one Tylenol PM cause dementia? Of course not. Nobody is saying that. And the makers of these products will be quick to tell you the label clearly says, not for use beyond 2 weeks. But walk into any retirement community in Florida or Arizona and ask honestly how many residents have been using a PM sleep aid for years. The label says 2 weeks. The shelf life of the habit is closer to 20. And there's a second layer most consumers miss. Diphenhydramine in older adults is also associated with daytime grogginess, dry mouth, blurred vision, urinary retention, and falls. Geriatricians actively discourage its routine use in elderly patients because of those effects. A fall at 68 is not the same event as a fall at 28. A broken hip changes a life. Tylenol PM isn't a poison, but it's also not the gentle sleep helper the box implies. For the audience that uses it most, older Americans taking it most nights for years, it deserves a much harder conversation than the marketing has ever offered. 5. Advil PM. If you understood what we just said about Tylenol PM, the conversation about Advil PM gets twice as uncomfortable. Why? Because Advil PM stacks 2 warnings on top of each other. The PM half is the same diphenhydramine, same anticholinergic concern, same cumulative effects on an aging brain. Nothing changes there. But the Advil half adds something Tylenol PM doesn't have, a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug, ibuprofen. And ibuprofen carries a label warning Americans have been quietly desensitized to. In 2015, the FDA strengthened, for the second time in a decade, the warnings on every non-aspirin NSAID sold in the United States. The agency formally announced that ibuprofen, naproxen, and similar drugs can increase the risk of heart attack and stroke, even with short-term use, and that the risk may begin within a few weeks of starting an NSAID. The FDA's own language stated that estimates of increased risk ranged from 10% to 50% or more, depending on the drug and the dose. The risk was not limited to people who already had heart disease, and it may rise the longer someone takes the drug. That warning is on your Advil bottle right now, in tiny grey print on the side of the box. Most people have never read it. Now, picture the typical Advil PM customer, mid-50s, mid-60s, maybe some arthritis, maybe a back that aches at night, maybe a blood pressure pill in the morning. Statistically, also the exact demographic with the highest cardiovascular risk in the country. And what does the package quietly invite you to do? Take this every night. You're stacking an NSAID, with its real FDA-documented cardiovascular signal, on top of a diphenhydramine, with its real, repeatedly documented anticholinergic signal, and handing the combination to the exact age group most vulnerable to both. There is no version of that math that is reassuring. 4. Aleve. Aleve gets advertised as the all-day painkiller. 1 pill in the morning, pain gone until evening. For people who hate popping pills every 4 hours, that long-lasting promise is irresistible. Here's what long-lasting actually means. The active ingredient in Aleve is naproxen. Compared to ibuprofen, naproxen has a much longer half-life, meaning it stays in your bloodstream longer. The convenience is real, so is the consequence. The same 2015 FDA strengthening that hit Advil hit Aleve. Same warning, same NSAID class. The risk of cardiovascular events is real for all non-aspirin NSAIDs, and the risk tends to be greater at higher doses and with longer use. But there's a quieter problem unique to long-acting naproxen. Because it lingers in the system, the stomach lining gets a longer exposure with each dose. Naproxen, like other NSAIDs, can irritate the gut, Doctors warn that NSAID-related gastrointestinal bleeding, ulcers, and in severe cases hemorrhagic stroke are real risks, especially in older adults. Open any Aleve commercial. Who's in it? Middle-aged people, retirees, the folks loading groceries into the trunk, the gardeners, the grandparents lifting toddlers, and those are precisely the people whose stomachs and hearts are quietly thinning with age. Aleve isn't poison, but the take-one-last-all-day pitch hides a real trade-off. More hours of relief means more hours of exposure. For the right user, fine. For the wrong user, it's a slow problem hiding behind a clean marketing line. 3. Bayer Daily Aspirin and Bayer Back and Body. Now we get to one of the strangest stories in modern American medicine. The story of the aspirin habit nobody talks about anymore. For 30 years, you couldn't escape it. An aspirin a day keeps the doctor away. Your father did it, your uncle did it. Your doctor probably told your spouse to start doing it after the first borderline cholesterol reading. That advice, for millions of healthy adults, was officially walked back in 2022. The U.S. Preventive Services Task Force formally recommended against starting low-dose aspirin, the 81 milligram daily kind, for the primary prevention of cardiovascular disease in adults 60 years and older. Plain English, if you haven't already had a heart attack or stroke and you're past 60, don't start daily aspirin. The risk of bleeding outweighs the benefit. Recent studies found that the side effects of daily aspirin, bleeding, stomach ulcers, and in severe cases hemorrhagic stroke, often outweigh the benefits in older adults. Read that line again. Then walk into any drugstore in America and look at the wall of Bayer products. Bayer Low Dose, Bayer Back and Body, Bayer Safety Coated, Bayer Chewable. The entire architecture of those displays was built on a recommendation that, for huge portions of the population, no longer applies. Bayer Back and Body adds caffeine to the aspirin. Same trick as Excedrin, designed to amplify effect, designed to feel like it works. Combine that with someone in their 70s who started their daily aspirin in 1995 and never stopped because nobody told them the science had changed. And you have a slow-motion bleed waiting to happen. The drug itself isn't villainous. The marketing inertia is. Aspirin still has a legitimate life-saving role. After a confirmed heart attack, after certain types of stents, in specific patients under a doctor's care. But the casual generational habit of an aspirin a day for everyone over 50 is medicine from a different era. If you're still doing it because someone told you to in 1998, that's a conversation worth having with your doctor before your next refill. 2. Goodies powder and BC powder. Now we travel a little further south, to a category of painkiller that gets less national press, but quietly sells millions of doses a year across the American South. The powders. Goodies powder, BC powder. The little folded paper packets your granddaddy used to dump into a glass of Coca-Cola at the gas station. They are something close to a southern tradition. They are also one of the most aggressively combined OTC painkillers on the American market. Both products stack the same general formula. Acetaminophen, aspirin, and a generous dose of caffeine. In one folded paper packet you get all three. And because the powder dissolves and absorbs fast, that hit lands harder and quicker than a tablet would. That's the appeal. That's also the risk. Stacking acetaminophen with aspirin means stacking liver stress with bleeding risk. Adding caffeine on top of that, especially for someone who already drinks coffee all morning, pushes blood pressure up, heart rate up, and may set the stage for that same medication overuse headache problem we talked about with Excedrin. For an older adult on a daily blood thinner. For someone with mild kidney disease they don't know about. For a person who quietly takes 3 or 4 of these a day during summer construction work, these powders are not the gentle, old reliable the packaging suggests. The label says 1 or 2 packets. Walk into any worksite, gas station, or break room in the Carolinas and ask how many people actually stop at 2. A product that fast, that strong, and that easy to overuse deserves much more respect than the dusty marketing has ever given it. Fun brand name Tylenol Extra Strength. The first and final name on this list might be the most controversial, because for a lot of American families, it isn't just a painkiller, it's practically a family member. Tylenol. The Tylenol. Extra Strength. Red letters. White bottle. Trusted for half a century. And to be clear up front, we're not saying acetaminophen is dangerous when used correctly. We're not saying, don't take Tylenol when you need it. The active ingredient is genuinely useful, and for people who can't tolerate NSAIDs, it's often the safest option available. What we're saying is this: the bottle on your shelf is the most marked up version of the drug in the entire store. Generic acetaminophen typically costs around 5 cents per caplet. Brand name Tylenol averages closer to 10 cents per caplet, sometimes far more depending on the formulation. Buy in bulk and the gap widens further. A bag of generic acetaminophen can cost about $2 per 100 tablets. Brand name Tylenol can run $12 or more for the same count. Same molecule, same milligrams, same FDA-required bioequivalence. Generic acetaminophen contains the exact same active ingredient as brand name Tylenol and works identically. Both are FDA approved. Both are equally safe and effective when used as directed. The premium is not buying you better medicine. It is buying you a logo, a marketing budget, and decades of habit. Now layer on the second issue. Tylenol Extra Strength's main risk isn't hidden. It is the most well-known acetaminophen problem in medicine: the liver. Acetaminophen toxicity remains one of the leading causes of acute liver failure in the United States. Most of those cases don't come from people deliberately overdosing. They come from people who didn't realize they were stacking acetaminophen across multiple products. A Tylenol Extra Strength here, a NyQuil dose later, a Theraflu before bed, each one well within the labeled dose. The total, quietly, invisibly, over the daily limit. You buy Tylenol because you trust the brand. The brand depends on you not reading the back of the box on your cold medicine. And while you're paying double for that trust, the same molecule sits one shelf over at a fraction of the price, manufactured under the same FDA standards. The product itself isn't the villain. The math of paying premium prices for identical chemistry, while the liver risk lurks invisibly in the background, deserves a much harder look than most families ever give it. So that's the harder conversation. 7 of the most familiar names in the American medicine cabinet, and the reasons researchers, pharmacists, and frankly, your own wallet might raise an eyebrow. But this isn't a video designed to leave you afraid. There are options on those same drugstore shelves that are quietly, genuinely better. They don't have the marketing budget, they don't have the green box or the famous red letters. That's exactly the point. Here are 3. Safe pick 1. Single ingredient. Generic store brand. The first one is sitting on the shelf right next to every product we just discussed. Most people walk right past it. Single ingredient generic store brand acetaminophen. Single ingredient generic store brand ibuprofen. CVS. Walgreens. Walmart's Equate. Kroger's House brand. Costco's Kirkland Signature. Target's Up and Up. These are not knockoffs. They are FDA-approved generic equivalents, manufactured under the same federal bioequivalence standards as the name brands. A generic drug contains the same active ingredient as the brand it copies, same milligrams, same safety profile, a fraction of the price. The key phrase is single ingredient. Buy the bottle that says only acetaminophen or only ibuprofen on the active ingredient line. No PM, no caffeine, no multi-symptom blend, just the one chemical your body actually needs. When you choose single ingredient, you control what goes in. You can't accidentally double dose your acetaminophen by stacking it with a hidden cold medicine. You can't unknowingly take an anticholinergic that affects your aging brain. You're treating the symptom in front of you. Pain, fever, that are nothing more. For most American families, switching to single ingredient store brand is the single biggest, easiest, safest upgrade you can make to your medicine cabinet. It's cheaper, simpler, and frankly, what most pharmacists buy for their own homes. Safe pick 2. Topical diclofenac gel, sold OTC as Voltaren. Option 2 is one a lot of older Americans still haven't heard about, which is strange because it has quietly become one of the most useful additions to the OTC shelf in the last decade. Topical diclofenac gel, sold over the counter under the brand name Voltaren and increasingly available in store brand versions for less. It's an NSAID, the same drug family as ibuprofen and naproxen. But here's the twist that matters. Instead of swallowing it and sending it through your stomach, your liver, your kidneys, and your bloodstream, you rub it directly into the joint where it hurts. For arthritis pain, for a sore knee, for an aching shoulder, for the back stiffness that doesn't quite need a pill, but won't go away on its own. Because it's applied topically, far less of the drug enters the rest of your body. Most of the systemic risks oral NSAIDs carry, cardiovascular events, gastrointestinal bleeding, kidney concerns, drop substantially compared to swallowing the same drug. It's not zero. Nothing is zero. But for the right kind of pain, localized, achy, joint-based, it's a quieter, less invasive option than reaching for daily ibuprofen. It's also non-addictive. It doesn't make you drowsy. It doesn't interact with most blood pressure medications the way oral NSAIDs do. And it has changed life quality for a lot of arthritis patients who had nowhere else to turn. If you're over 50 and you're popping ibuprofen daily for a bad knee, ask your pharmacist whether a topical gel could replace at least some of those doses. Most pharmacists are happy to walk through it with you. They just don't bring it up unless you ask. Safe pick 3. The principle: no brand will ever sell you. The third one isn't really a brand, it's an idea. And it might be the most valuable thing you take away from this entire video. The safest painkiller in your house is not a particular bottle. It is the lowest effective dose, taken for the shortest possible time, of the simplest formulation that works. That's not marketing language. That is essentially what every pharmacology textbook teaches, what every cautious doctor practices, and what the OTC industry has spent the last 40 years training Americans to forget. Pain happens. Headaches happen. Period cramps, sprained ankles, post-dental aches, the kind of stiff lower back that comes with a bad night's sleep. For occasional, short-term use, a single dose of generic acetaminophen or a single dose of generic ibuprofen, taken with food, with water, and not stacked with anything else, is a reasonable, time-tested tool. The danger is not the occasional dose. The danger is the routine, the "I just keep one in the car," the "I take 2 before bed every night," the "I drink coffee with my BC powder every morning at the job site." Those routines stack quietly. The liver counts every milligram, the kidneys count every dose, the blood vessels count every year. Single ingredient, lowest dose, shortest time. And, when in doubt, especially if you're over 60 on other medications or treating something that hasn't gone away in a few days, talk to a real human pharmacist or your doctor. They are paid to know things the bottle will never tell you. That principle, applied honestly, is worth more than any specific brand recommendation anyone on the internet could ever give you. Here's what hits hardest about all of this. The medicine cabinet has always felt safe. It's small, it's familiar. It's been part of family life for generations. You don't think of it as a place that needs investigation. You think of it as a place that helps. But the bottles inside it were placed there by companies. Companies with marketing budgets, manufacturing decisions, lobbying departments, and quarterly earnings reports. None of which are evil, but none of which exist primarily to protect you either. They exist to sell you something you will keep buying. The single most powerful thing you can do, not just for yourself but for your spouse, your parents, the grandkids who'll inherit your habits, is to read the back of the bottle. Compare it to the generic next to it. Notice what's actually inside a multi-symptom combo. Ask the pharmacist before you commit to a daily pill. Question the routine. That's not paranoia. That's the kind of quiet, careful attention your grandparents would have called common sense. So before you go, open your medicine cabinet tonight. Just open it. Look at what's actually in there. How many of those bottles have been sitting on that shelf longer than a year? How many are combination products with 3 or 4 active ingredients? How many PM formulas? How many Excedrins, Aleve, Bayer Back and Bodies, Tylenol PMs that you reach for on autopilot without ever thinking about what's inside? Drop a comment and tell me what you found. Tell me which brand has been in your house the longest. Tell me which one your mother used to swear by. And if anything in this video made you pause, share it with someone over 60 who probably still has half the products we mentioned sitting on the shelf, because the truth is, the painkiller aisle isn't a neutral space. It never was. And the family that asks the right questions is the family that ages a little better than the family that doesn't. Take care of your cabinet. Take care of your liver. Take care of each other.